So hello there guys and welcome back to a brand new episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. I hope you're well. Things are going great right now in the world of Formula 1. So much excitement and so much to talk about, which of course we are going to relay back to you. And after an incredible Grand Prix that we saw at Silverstone last weekend, arguably the race of the season, maybe one of the best races that we've seen in this turbo hybrid era, we are now going to be moving on to the Austrian Grand Prix, and hopefully that will provide similar levels of excitement and stories to talk about. But of course, as a quick reminder to you guys, we are the independent F1 podcast made by the fans and for the fans, as we do race reviews, previews, and relay all of the latest news, gossip, and talking points in the world of Formula 1 for your listening or viewing pleasure. And joining me on this episode of the DNF1 podcast for the Austrian Grand Prix review is a very good friend of the show, actually, someone that we haven't had on for a little while because he's been incredibly busy and going on to do some incredible stuff on his own channel and also for a few other channels as well. We have 1/3 of Live Fast, obviously a member of Veloce as well, and one of the hosts of the Talking Points F1 podcast, as well as his own channel. It's Aldas coming back on the show. So Aldas, first of all, thank you very much for coming on the show. How have you been?
I've been very good. We were talking before, actually, we started the video. That's been too long. It's definitely been too long. I think over a year. So yeah, great to be back. Obviously, a really exciting season. We're not even halfway through it or just about to get halfway through it. So yeah, plenty to talk about. We do still have a championship battle, Ferrari versus Red Bull. So that's always great. And yeah, just buzzing as always to talk about Formula One.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've kind of hit the nail on the head. We still have a relatively competitive championship at the moment. But of course, we're just going to be hoping for things to kind of spark into life. And perhaps the second half of the season, as we're fastly approaching the halfway point, will prove to be a little bit more competitive than what we've seen so far. It's been swings and roundabouts, but plenty to talk about. And hopefully we're going to get more of what we saw at Silverstone, for example. But before we get into that in Austria, I obviously want to talk about a little bit about your ventures recently. You've been taking up quite a lot of karting. I've been following your Instagram for a little while, and you've been quite busy on the karting scene. How did that come about, and how's that been going for you?
I mean, to be honest, karting is just something I think all, young Formula One fans, we all wanted to be, F1 drivers growing up, but it's something that I just never could really afford to do, to be honest, when I was like 12, 13, 14. And to be honest, it only started last year when I kind of, had a bit of money to be able to just do a bit of rental karting. So that's how it kind of started last year. And then I've been able to take part this season in a few different series. I'm doing the Rye House Pro Kart series and also doing another series of Buckmore as well, which are two quite famous tracks in the UK. And it's just something that I love. To be honest, there's nothing more that I love than racing. When you're karting, it's just so amazing. And you kind of like the emotions that you see, your heroes, the Formula One drivers go through, obviously on a much different scale, but that's the same things that you go through when you're racing yourself. You feel the frustration. We talk about, for example, the pressure of being chased down by someone. When you're in that position in a car and you can hear and you've got someone barreling behind you, and you're trying to defend your position or something like that, it's kind of strange to actually be in that position. So from that kind of side, it's also awesome. It's just, one of the things that I love doing. I'm definitely looking to do more and more of it. It's just, I love racing, and karting is kind of a relatively inexpensive, relative to, motorsport in general. It's a relatively inexpensive way to kind of do a bit of racing. And I'm doing pretty well. I've got a few podiums in kind of the series that I'm doing. So yeah, it's just, I love karting. I literally, this entire podcast could literally be about karting. So it's quite interesting how there's some parallels between Formula One, my analysis, and also me racing as well. I actually feel like it does help me a little bit now to understand the point of view of the drivers. So it's definitely something that I've loved doing recently.
I mean, have you started developing a few race driver excuses, as you often get sometimes when you're racing? And don't worry, it's absolutely fine. I mean, I'm certainly privy to a bit of karting myself. I grew up obviously trying to be a Formula One driver, and obviously that involves a lot of karting from grassroots level, if you like. And you very quickly understand certain driver excuses that you get. It's, I didn't quite get the tyres warmed up, or there was a little bit of graining here, or there was a little bit of marbles offline. Those kind of little things just to explain why you might not have been able to be the fastest or win a certain race. They usually always come out when you haven't won a race, for example. Have you started developing a few of those yet?
To be honest, I've always tried to stay like super grounded and know that some people are just going to be quicker. Like weight is another thing that's really massive. So I've also started to just train a little bit as well, just to make sure like that I get to the right weight. So that's how invested I am. Like I am making life changes for the karting. But I feel like, you know what? Yeah, I haven't had too many racing driver excuses because there are days where you're just not the fastest and there is no excuse. So, but yeah, again, it's all about, it sounds like a cliche, but it is just about learning. I love to film as well. Actually, my two kind of biggest things I love are content creation and karting. So I love to film my karting, kind of look back and analyze my race, analyze where I went wrong. So yeah, I feel like I've got quite an open mind in terms of when I just didn't do a good enough job. So yeah, maybe, yeah, I feel like I've got that.
Well, it's certainly good to hear. I mean, I totally agree. The weight one is definitely one of the most common that I've heard from a lot of people. I think I used that once myself, although it was completely irrelevant at the time. But yeah, you never really want to proudly admit if someone else is doing a better job than you on a day. There's always one or two in the portfolio you just want to pull out and say, oh yeah, this is why and that's why. But you're absolutely right. It is certainly, in my opinion, one of the most pure versions of motorsport there really is. And I definitely would recommend to anyone that hasn't taken up karting or would want to consider it, definitely to do it. Time when I had a kart as a kid, it was some of the best times of my life racing with some friends and people like that. It's really, really good stuff. So no, it's great to hear, and obviously glad to hear that you're doing so well. Hopefully that continues, and obviously we might get to see a bit more content from you on the karting scene as well. But of course, Aldas, while we've got you here, we need to talk about what's going on in F1 right now. And you were at Goodwood last weekend. You were previewing the British Grand Prix. Obviously, following on from that, yourself, Matt Amise, and Hayden was obviously talking about the British Grand Prix on your own podcast. Just to summarize from what you guys were talking about there, I mean, how amazing was the British Grand Prix in your opinion? I mean, was it the race of the season?
Yeah, absolutely. It was an incredible race. I feel like, taking away what happened on lap one, which obviously you never want to see, like just, putting that to one side, the racing was incredible. I do feel like it was kind of made by the fact that, you are able to overtake around Silverstone, and sometimes it's going to go right, sometimes it's going to go not. I feel like if Max Verstappen, if the Yuki Tsunoda and also Pierre Gasly collision did not happen, Max Verstappen, I do feel like he would have just kind of just launched into the distance, never to be seen again, all the way to the win. So we did kind of get lucky there. But again, Silverstone is a track that invites moves, and inviting moves also invites mistakes as well, which I think is what we saw. We saw a few, strategical blunders perhaps by Ferrari. Obviously that's going to be debated. But even at the end, we saw some amazing racing. That whole, Sergio Perez, Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton, those 3 or 4 laps. I mean, that is what we want to see. That's the magic of Formula One. That's the magic of motorsport. And to know how quickly they're driving as well. I mean, Charles Leclerc going around the outside on worn tyres on Lewis Hamilton at Copse. I mean, that was just a ridiculous move by itself. And that's what we want to see. And that's actually what we got. I mean, those last 20 laps were just incredible. That safety car restart, even with the likes of Schumacher and Verstappen getting very close. And even Fernando Alonso and Lando Norris getting in the mix as well. So it was just everything we want to see, again, apart from the crash. And luckily, everyone was okay. Formula One and all the safety kind of did their job. But it's just everything you want to see. A bit of drama, a few collisions between, some of the cars. Of course, you saw, the 2 AlphaTauri teammates, which I'm sure they were not happy. And again, we got to see a great Grand Prix, which is, exactly what we want to see. And for a packed out crowd at Silverstone, I think they got exactly what they paid for.
Yeah, well, it was Damian Lewis that was talking about this to Martin Brundle on the grid. He was astounded, a regular F1 fan and been to quite a few races himself, was absolutely astounded at the fact that so many people, this new generation of F1 fans that you and I have obviously, we followed F1 for a little while now, so it's quite a new thing even still to see so many fans out there packing the grandstands. And it just highlights how much F1's popularity is improved, and there's so many different reasons as for what that is. I can't list all of them. We'll be here all day to talk about that, but the atmosphere itself, the racing that just complemented that. I mean, there were a few highlight moments, as you've already mentioned, especially the one where Lewis, Checo and Charles were all fighting each other at Club and Vale, and obviously Lewis goes underneath the pair of them to a huge eruption of applause and cheers from the British fans. That is what F1 is about in its purest form. And look, I might be biased, and I'm sure you might agree with this to a certain degree as well, being in the country for some time now, that they just don't quite do it the same anywhere else as they do in the UK. I've always held that view, and I just feel like it's so nice to have a track like Silverstone, which promotes overtaking, promotes controversy, promotes races that never seemingly go according to plan and always throw up these crazy results. So, I don't know really what much more we can say about that, really. Unless there's anything you wanted to add before we get into the talking points.
I mean, even the British weather kind of came through as well. In qualifying, we had kind of the mixed conditions of going from like a little bit drier to really wet. And Carlos Sainz getting his first win. We didn't even mention that. So, yeah, first Grand Prix win. That's amazing as well. Really good for him to kind of get the season rolling. He was right there in Canada. Didn't quite get it done against Max. But, yeah, through a bit of luck and also, some good driving by him, it kind of all came together. So, yeah, happy for him as well. And again, Silverstone, that trophy, I know that he got kind of another trophy, but when you see that Silverstone trophy, the original, the classic, I mean, that's why you want to win Silverstone. That trophy is special.
It's very much Wimbledon-esque in that regard. There's that prestige.
Definitely, yeah.
It's literally a physical embodiment of prestige and racing heritage, that trophy. I really wish the drivers could keep it. As far as I understand, literally the only time they can hold it is from when they're on the podium. After that, it goes back in the museum and their name's put on the sort of plating on the side that goes with it, which is a shame, but I suppose that comes with the tradition. But obviously we talked about the big crash at the start, and I do want to start there because there's been since its inception, the halo has always been something that quite a few F1 fans, I think a lot of us when it was first introduced, questioned whether or not it was needed, purely and simply because aesthetically it wasn't pleasing on the eye. We were so used to this idea of F1 being a sport purely about having open cockpits. It was always part of that element of risk or the danger, and perhaps because it didn't cause so many casualties in the last 20 years since Ayrton Senna's death, we kind of took it for granted as something that probably wasn't needed. We fast forward since its inception, I think it was, 2016 that they brought it into, or
2018.
2018, right?
2018.
Yes, they tested it a few times, but since it was brought into the sport in 2018, it's been scary how so many incidents have occurred. And we would talk about the Leclerc one in Spa, just as one of the first ones that I remember. And obviously, I won't list them all, but obviously what we saw this weekend, the crash in the F2 race as well with Roy Nissany and Dennis Hauger, for example, it boggles the mind as to how there are still some people out there that still do not see the validity in having the halo in Formula One or any motorsport series with an open cockpit. I mean, in your mind, do you feel that this argument should be put to bed after what we saw this weekend, or even still something that should have been put to bed a long time ago?
Yeah, I think it should have been put to bed a long time ago. To be honest, I don't remember being too militant about it when it first launched. I do remember thinking that I didn't like the look of it, but I totally understood it for a safety point of view. And actually, something I do remember is that after 3 or 4 races, I just forgot it was there. I remember being kind of swept up in the new graphics on the Halo and thought, oh, that was quite cool, actually. So yeah, I've never been kind of massively militant against the Halo, and I think it's proved its worth many times. The drivers also, some of them were critical, and again, they're the ones in the cockpit, so maybe they don't like the look of it, but very quickly they just kind of got used to it, like we all have pretty much. So yeah, I think it's definitely done exactly what it needed to do. And again, we talk about Silverstone, Formula 2, and in Formula 1, especially actually that, I think that Dennis Hauger one, especially the one in Formula 2 where he was launched, into Roy Nissany, that looked horrible, and you wonder what would have happened if the halo wasn't there. So yeah, to me it's an argument that if for anyone that doesn't kind of agree with it, it's almost like it's not even worth talking to them. If you don't think that it's worth it now, it's never going to change your mind. But to me, it's definitely something that I've already gotten used to. It's something that's probably saved the lives of a few drivers, there's no doubt about it, in my opinion, or at the very least even done something to help them from serious injury. So to me, there was never even an argument, especially after the Leclerc kind of Alonso incident in Spa 2018. And yet again, it's been proven to potentially save another driver's life, which is the most important thing.
Yeah, I mean, people can sugarcoat it all they want, but I feel like we just need to be blunt about these things. I mean, if the halo was not on the car this weekend, for example, Roy Nissany, there's a good chance that he wouldn't have lived to tell the tale or walk away from that incident. Yeah. I mean, I don't see why people feel like we need to speculate. I think the images were quite telling on their own. If the halo wasn't there, yeah, in F2, God knows what would have happened. We know what would have happened. So I agree. I don't see the point in worrying about this from an aesthetics perspective. And even then, I mean, you might have been privy on YouTube or other channels that produce this kind of content where you see videos of people driving on games in cars or showing images of modern day F1 cars without the halo. And to me, it kind of feels like they're a bit naked. Like it doesn't look right anymore. I don't know. How do you feel about that? Because it feels to me like it's a spring day and you feel a bit naked without a jacket on. You just put it on, even though it's a bit warm, it just doesn't feel right without a jacket on. And it kind of feels like that to me. Like the halo just seems normal now. We're used to it.
Especially when I look at actually the 2017 cars, because that was kind of like the in-between era of when they brought the wider cars, but only for that one season was there no halo. I mean, again, I still prefer the cars that didn't have a halo just from an aesthetics point of view, but that doesn't mean that I don't want the halo. So yeah, it's just, again, I've gotten used to it. It's kind of like a different era now when we see cars with the fully open cockpits and when you see the entirety of the driver's helmet. Yeah, it's just like a little different era now, but it's something that I've got used to. It definitely looks a little bit strange when you look at cars from 2016 or 2014 or something, but yeah, that's just the modern Formula One. And I think they've actually, especially with the 2022 cars, now that they're a lot more smoother, they're a lot more flowing. Last year with the previous regulations, they were a little bit more boxy actually. When you look at like the two cars side by side, and I feel like the halo is kind of blended in even more now. So yeah, it's something that I feel like it kind of defines different eras, but now I don't even think about it. That's a strange part. When I look at a Formula One car, I barely even look at the halo. I barely even notice it. And the only time I do talk about it or notice it is when it saves a driver's life, which is kind of its job really. It's not there to be noticed. It's there to do a job. And yeah, it kind of like, I suppose, defines the new era of Formula One.
Yeah, I mean, it amazes me how a small piece of titanium like that resembles a wishbone in its shape can do so much good and save so many. It's crazy how often it's come into play and actually done its job. You'd almost take it for granted. But no, I agree. I wouldn't want to put a halo on a 2004 Ferrari, for example. It would look weird. But then if I took it off the F175 this year, it would look even weirder. And maybe these new cars are so aesthetically pleasing on the eye, at least in my opinion. I'm still trying to get used to the higher profile tyres, to be honest. Sometimes I look at certain angles and think they're a little bit chunky, and that would it look so bad with the smaller ones. But I know this is something that they've tried to merge in for a long time, and I think it's just something over time we'll probably just get used to it, in the same way that we got used to the wider tyres that they introduced back in 2017 to compensate with those new regulations compared to how thin they were before that. So yeah, I agree with you. I mean, as I said, I've heard a lot of people have their views on this. If you're going to argue from an aesthetic perspective, I think, unlike other things, F1 has demonstrated that this is needed, and there's no discussion to be had to take it away. But on the subject of other safety measures, obviously the start that we had at Silverstone was obviously a dangerous one. There wasn't really any one person that you could blame for that. Not that anyone was looking to blame anyone, fortunately. Fortunately, Zhou Guanyu was able to walk away from it, but there were concerns from George Russell, who he felt that there was an issue with the gap between the fencing and the tyre barriers. Is that something that should be brought to the top of the priority? I mean, because I can't come across at this with an opinion of how to resolve this other than just push the tyre wall back so there's no gap in between. But I'm not quite sure if that would be the best solution. What were your thoughts on that?
It's a really difficult one, actually, because I did actually kind of hear what George said in terms of like, that it needs to be looked at. But to me, it's kind of, this is a really, bizarre situation. First of all, even the gravel trap, a gravel trap is not supposed to stop a car that's upside down. The entire point is that the more surface area there is, if the car's facing the right way, then that's the best way for a gravel trap to stop it. But it's a really weird thing for a car to be upside down going at that speed. So yeah, it's just a bizarre incident. But even though I can't kind of nail down like specifics, like, yes, the tire wall needs to be moved back or something, or there needs to be more tires in there or whatever, I think there's always a learning lesson for sure. And the FIA are going to do, and they always do, by the way, whenever there's a really big crash, they always do a very big investigation to see what can be learned. And I feel like everything all of the safety aspects kind of did their job. Both, the gravel kind of stopping the car as much as it did. It did then dig in, of course, but again, it's kind of a weird angle for the car to be at. So that's why it dug in. And also the tire kind of barrier did its job as well. And the catch fencing, especially, I mean, I don't know about anyone else, but I did not realize how strong that catch fencing actually was. The fact that it literally just engulfed the Formula One car and just stopped it from going anywhere near the grandstand. So everything did their job as it needed to. Yes, perhaps the fact that the car kind of landed in between kind of the Armco barrier and the tires, that maybe needs to be looked at. But at the same time, I think it was my friend Matt that kind of pointed out that you can't have like the barriers kind of glued, you can't have the tires and the barriers glued to each other, because if there is a problem, they do actually need to be kind of, they need to be movable in terms of like for a Formula One car for it to absorb the impact. They can't just hit kind of a solid structure. So it's a very kind of fluid and difficult situation to kind of comment on. But I think that all of the safety kind of did its job, both in terms of the car, the survival cell, and everything at the track as well. But yeah, of course, there are lessons to be learned. There's always lessons to be learned to kind of prevent something like this or prevent any injury, because this is a freak accident. I mean, is it going to happen again? Probably. You're talking about race cars going at hundreds of miles an hour. And when you make contact, sometimes they are going to flip. So maybe these freak accidents are inevitable, but it's just about making sure that the driver is okay. So I think that's what's really important in terms of learning why everything worked and perhaps implementing it on some other tracks and just improving the safety in general.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. I mean, the takeaway from it all is, of course, there will be lessons to be learned and investigations on how to improve this. And I agree, the FIA have done an incredible job over the last 3 decades in trying to improve safety measures. And more often than not, these investigations, sometimes these crazy things that you don't foresee have to happen in order to make that next step forward. And that's not to condone that, live dangerously and then we'll learn from that. But sometimes no one foresees something like that happening. And then when it does, it's reassuring to know that the safety measures in place have actually done their job. And I'm with you. I was absolutely astounded by how strong that fencing was. I mean, the G-forces on Zhou's car when it would have gone into that fence would have been crazy. Just to think that the spectators were sitting so close to it. Who knows what could have happened if it had failed on them? I mean, it's not one you'd want to think about, but I digress on that one. But as I said, fortunately, lessons can be learned from this. Everyone was okay. Of course, Alex Albon got caught up in that as well. From what I hear, that he's going to be okay, although they're keeping an eye on his back to make sure that he'll be okay to compete this weekend. But it's all good news. Everyone seems to be fine. So that is the good takeaway from all of this. But moving on from that, moving on to the racing that we saw at Silverstone, one team that has obviously made the headlines, despite the fact that they got the victory, was Ferrari for the wrong reasons. And ultimately what it comes down to, Aldas, as you would already know, is that in a lot of people's minds, whilst this was a great day for Carlos Sainz and whilst it was a great day for Ferrari to get their first win since Melbourne, ultimately it should have been much more. And in some ways, the wrong car won, by the opinion of some people. Now, of course, that's not me suggesting that Carlos shouldn't have won that race, but the way the race was panning out, it did seem like this was a perfect opportunity for Charles Leclerc to close in on Max Verstappen and sort of chip away at that large championship lead that he still has at this point in time. And a lot of it stems down to Ferrari's strategy call, or their ability to make the right strategy call at the right time when a shock safety car happens, as it did at Silverstone. So based on what we saw this weekend, obviously Ferrari's rationale for why they made the call that they did is they felt that Charles would be able to manage the gap to those behind him on the fresher tyres, that Sainz was more at risk, so they needed to get him in. They didn't think a double stack was possible, or at the very least that they shouldn't be doing it with both their cars anyway. They didn't believe that they could get a 1-2 or consolidate this result, or Leclerc could even win. I think Mattia Binotto said that there was no way that Charles Leclerc could win the race after that safety car. What were your thoughts on that? Would you agree with that viewpoint, or do you feel that this is more Ferrari just trying to be Ferrari, protect the brand, protect their reputation, rather than just own up and acknowledge and say, we messed up, even though we won, we messed one of our drivers' races up?
I think it's a tricky one because for me, the problem actually kind of stems even earlier in the race in terms of how late they let Charles Leclerc pass Carlos Sainz. Charles Leclerc only had about 8 laps in clean air from lap 31 when the whole team orders thing happened all the way to lap 39, which is when obviously the safety car came out. In those 8 laps with a damaged car, by the way, obviously, let's not forget that. I think he managed to pull something like 4.6 seconds. So over half a second a lap. That was his advantage to Carlos Sainz over the course of, those 8 laps in clean air. And that the whole, we didn't have a gap to double stack. If they pull that maneuver of letting Charles Leclerc, because they knew that he was the quicker driver, even from when Max lost out on the lead, obviously when he had the damaged car and he kind of pitted, Leclerc was all over the back of Sainz. It wasn't as if he closed up. He was always within that 1 second. Then obviously we had that kind of first phase of pit stops. And once that kind of worked itself out, it was still kind of status quo. He was still right behind Carlos Sainz. Now, if they acted kind of earlier, then they would have been under less pressure when it came to the safety car because, if you let Charles Leclerc go with about, maybe 15 or 20 laps until the safety car eventually came out, even though you don't know that it's going to come out, he would have had an even bigger gap. And then you do have the ability to double stack. You kind of put less pressure on yourself late on by just kind of biting the bullet and letting Leclerc go, doing the difficult thing and putting those team orders on Carlos Sainz because Leclerc is just the quicker driver. It's not as if, it was unfair to let Leclerc through. So yeah, it was just Ferrari, I think, a little bit lack of ruthlessness, a little bit lack of kind of assertiveness from Mattia Binotto, especially. We know if that was Red Bull, if that was, Sergio Perez kind of just holding up Max Verstappen, we know exactly who would be on the radio to let Max by. We know that would happen because they would just say that, just do it for the team. Max just has more pace. And I feel like that's what Ferrari is missing at the moment. Now, yeah, as far as the actual pit stop, it is a tricky one. They say they didn't have the gap. Apparently, they only had like 6 or 10 seconds to actually react before Charles actually crossed the pit. So it is a very tricky one. There's no doubt about it. I still think that, I know that they wanted to kind of keep Charles out there with track position because Lewis had kind of freshest tires out of the 3 of them because he didn't actually pit too late before then. I still think that Charles Leclerc on brand new softs, even if you give Lewis Hamilton the track position, and I'm sure Lewis would have stayed out. If the two Ferraris go in, Lewis is staying out there to go in the lead for his home race. I still back with about 10 or 15 laps of racing. I still back Charles Leclerc on fresh softs to get past Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes. I mean, he was able to almost defend from him even on a kind of used hard. So yeah, I know it's a difficult one, and it is always a difficult one when you're the car leading because it's almost a lose-lose situation because everyone can react to you. But I really would have backed Charles Leclerc to get the job done and overtake Lewis Hamilton on fresh softs. And obviously, Carlos Sainz had kind of nothing to lose. He would have also come in. Yes, they might have lost a little bit of time due to the double stacking, but ultimately, Sergio Perez was so far behind. I don't think Carlos Sainz was going to lose out to him anyway. So maybe it's hindsight, 2020 vision, but I don't think they played it perfectly. But again, I think it's actually because of what they did earlier, not letting Leclerc go sooner and building that gap. That would have took a whole load of pressure off them when the actual safety car came out. But ultimately, in my opinion, they didn't react quick enough earlier in the race and let Leclerc go.
Well, this is it. And I think there were a few moments in the race which kind of nailed down after that safety car had gone in. That Ferrari, I don't think it's a matter of incompetence. I think there's a reluctance from Ferrari. It seems to be more of an attitude where they kind of hope that this situation will just resolve itself. I think they were expecting Charles Leclerc at some point in that race when he was stuck behind his teammate to eventually overtake him. But I think because he'd had the best of the tyres that were available to him, with the less 5 points of downforce that he was losing with the damaged front wing, Ferrari were just kind of hoping that he was going to make that overtake, but Sainz was obviously doing his best job to keep him behind. He obviously wasn't going to let him through. The guy's trying to win his first Grand Prix, and he obviously still believes he's in this championship hunt, so he's not going to want to give way to his teammate because that will set a precedent for the rest of the season, one that we're familiar with all too well with the likes of Red Bull and in some regards Mercedes before this season. Obviously, they probably wouldn't do that now, or maybe they'll do it race specific, but it's something that Ferrari, I've always felt, have been reluctant to do for the last decade or so. We're talking...
But to be fair, I will say that Carlos Sainz, like when he was actually asked to let Charles go, he wasn't aggressive. He wasn't kind of, confrontational over the radio. Yes, he knew that he wasn't going to, he knew that he didn't have the pace. He knew that he knew that Charles Leclerc was all over him. And actually, it was a lot easier than I think probably Ferrari even thought it was going to be. And that's why I think they were scared because I think they were almost, we don't want to, Carlos Sainz still hasn't won his first race and we're asking him to get out of the way. But I think Carlos Sainz was smart enough to realize that I just don't have the pace against my teammates. So even when they thought there was going to be confrontation, I think Carlos was a lot more chilled about it than they probably thought he was going to be.
Well, they were trying to negotiate, weren't they? They were trying to tell him, right, you need to reach a certain lap time. They were talking to him about it a little bit, and he wanted an extra lap here or there. And he seemed like he was going to warm to the idea eventually, but it almost felt like if Ferrari can give me a lap time, I'll try to meet that, and hopefully that will be enough. Ultimately, it wasn't. Eventually, they did make the call. But again, it was that reluctance to just be firm and say, right, you've got to do this now. There's no negotiation. There's no do it in a lap or two. You have to do it now. And as I said, I think this is something that has stemmed from a history of the old Ferrari compared to the new Ferrari that we have now, that they're still haunted by some of those strategy calls that they made. I mean, Austria that we're going to this weekend, obviously 2001, 2002, Schumacher being let through at the end by Barrichello, obviously when it wasn't needed, and how badly that was taken by the F1 community. Obviously 2010 in Hockenheim, Fernando is faster than you. It's those moments where, from my perspective as a fan, and some, people that watch this will know I'm a Ferrari fan as well. Yes, I know it's not popular, but ultimately it's how teams win championships. And that's kind of what you got to do. The fact that Ferrari seem to be tiptoeing around these ideas, even now, hallmarks of what we saw with Vettel in 2018 when he needed to do that in Hockenheim. Yeah. And we both know how that ended. Obviously, you did a great video in going through all of that in great detail. And for me, I just feel like Ferrari, if they're going to win this championship right now, they've got a great car, they've got a great driver pair, and they obviously have an outstanding driver this season in Leclerc that can fight for this championship. But if you take the reliability out aside, and that's a big factor as well, Ferrari on an operational level need to be up there with the likes of Mercedes and Red Bull, of course, which is, a huge, huge ask. But right now, they seem to be nowhere near that. And if anything, it may leave Leclerc to have trust issues in his team. I'd be very surprised right now if Charles Leclerc wasn't doubting or questioning his trust in this team, being able to make the right call for him.
Yeah, I think he's going to have a few of those thoughts in the back of his mind, but he also is going to know that this is where he needs to really step up. He needs to have that kind of arm around the shoulder and kind of almost bring the team up. Yes, they're on a bit of a down. Yes, people are blaming him, blaming the team. And Maybe rightly so, of course, but this is the job of the driver now. This is where they almost like, even though, even though it is kind of Ferrari's fault, he needs to absorb that kind of, the pressure from the media and the fans and kind of put his arm around the team and show leadership. So it's going to be a tricky one for Charles. Big learning moment. He's still a young guy, but he is now very experienced in Formula One terms. So yeah, we're going to see how he's going to handle this situation. I feel like actually the examples, everyone knows that, the Austria 2002, not too many people actually know what happened the year before, like you mentioned, where they actually weren't fighting for the win, but Schumacher still was able to get past Barrichello due to team orders. That's the famous video where Jean Todt, you can actually see him on the pit wall where he's like, Rubens let Michael through for the championship. But the two big differences there is that 2001 was a tight season. That was
one
a very
made
good
sense.
season.
Yeah,
exactly. 2002 was just a disgrace. Like, even though team orders were allowed, Schumacher was miles ahead, and it was so early in the season as well. Like, it was so unnecessary, and that's what made it so egregious. And in 2010, the whole, Fernando's faster than you, let's not forget, that was when team orders were banned. They weren't allowed. So that's why they were controversial. If something like that happened now, it would be like, yeah, Fernando was faster than Felipe. Team orders are allowed. Fernando's the one fighting for the championship. Totally understandable. So team orders weren't allowed in 2010, and they were kind of like unbanned after that because people just thought, even though, Ferrari kind of, even though they did use illegal team orders, it was kind of like the right thing to do. So Ferrari, I think they're worried about that kind of flack, even though those were like really specific situations. And I think that's kind of one of the things that's missing from this team, and potentially Matteo Binotto and the leadership he has, just not enough assertiveness and too much caring about what the fans and the media are going to say. We're Ferrari. We're fighting this championship, whether you like it or not. If we win, that will silence all of the critics because success does all of the talking. So I want to see a bit more bravery from Ferrari, I think, for the remaining of the season.
I think they're going to be scrutinised one way or the other. I think the difference at the end of it, Aldous, is that are they going to be holding a championship trophy saying, I don't care, or are they going to be sitting there ruing on what could have been without one and still being criticised for not acting in the best interest of trying to win a championship? I think that's ultimately the difference. And I think, as you pointed out, the Ferrari of those eras were finding clever ways to either do something that was either unnecessary or do it for the sake of the championship anyway, like in 2002, or in 2010, where they just find a clever way to go against the rules but not be caught for it, because everyone knew they did it, but no one could actually prove that what they said was in line with issuing team orders. It was just a coded message, and that was it. So,
well, actually, to be fair, they did get
they
done
did,
in court,
yes, they did,
$100,000 fine.
But that kind, for me, I just looked at that. It's kind of like what happened in 2002 when Michael put Rubens on the podium. They hated what they did, but they just gave him a big £1 million fine or $1 million fine or something like that in 2002, just because of how badly that was received. The only thing they could punish him for. So yeah, I agree. Yeah, it was one of those where they just reacted just for the sake of being able to punish him for something. But obviously, in the case of Ferrari going forward now, what would you say? Do you think it's important now, as you mentioned, leadership from Charles Leclerc? And I kind of want to pinpoint to Sainz's radio message when they issued the order to him about keeping a 10-car length to Leclerc to sort of protect him. Carlos went straight on the radio and said, no, we can't be doing this. It's silly. Stop inventing, obviously, the phrase that's been doing the rounds on social media from this. And Sainz took leadership in that regard, did what he needed to do, and he won the race, similar to what he did in Monaco when he wanted to go on the dries rather than stay on the inters and questioning Ferrari's strategy call. We haven't seen that from Leclerc much. He seems to be trusting the team and doing what they need him to do. Do you feel now that Leclerc, as a big part of his development from what we've seen so far, needs to start being in a position where if he doesn't believe or trust the strategy call the team are making, he needs to take charge and make the final decision on this in the same way that Sainz has been doing?
That's a really difficult one to answer. I mean, first of all, Carlos Sainz is a very smart driver, and he, made the right choices on all of those occasions. But on all of those occasions, he was behind Leclerc. We're talking about, it's much easier to make those, big out there decisions when you're behind your teammate and kind of have less to lose. Because of Leclerc's pace, he's always been in the firing line. He's kind of always been in the front. And it's a weird one, you're asking Leclerc to start not trusting his team, and that can get very, very touchy, inside of the team when you stop trusting them, especially if you then make it really obvious where you're like going against them every single time. I think there has to be just more communication. This has to be a learning experience for them. They kind of have to realize there's got to be more communication now when you're asking about team orders, when you're asking about strategy, more communication. Instead of like, let's go against each other, let's have just a different kind of dialogue. I know it's super tight on time in terms of like, especially with like those safety car calls, but yeah, there's got to be more into it. So that's a very tricky one. I'm not sure if I'd, go up to Leclerc and say, you need to stop trusting your team. Like that's what you need to do, because I feel like that just opens, Pandora's box in terms of what that does inside of Ferrari, and also between him and his mechanics and him and his team. Like you don't want to, you don't want to mess with that too much. You want to build a team around you and have that trust, and also have that no blame culture as well. That we got it wrong. Let's learn from it. Let's do the right thing next time. What can we do different next time? So it's a tricky one, but Charles is learning on his feet. Fighting for a championship is not the same as fighting for a P5 or a P4 on a really good day. It's when you're fighting for wins, it's a different level, it's different gravy, and he's definitely learning that now. But I'd continue to trust the team, but I'd definitely be more open to them on the radio in terms of like, tell me more information now. I want to make an informed decision, and I do want to trust you, but I need more info.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and I think that's a really good balance that they need to try and find. And this goes for both Leclerc and the team as well. I mean, you talked about no blame culture. Obviously, the image that comes to my mind as soon as you say that was obviously Mattia Binotto sort of having a pep talk with Charles after the race, but also wagging the finger about it. And I think it doesn't take a genius to sort of understand what he was saying to him. And it was probably along the lines of, obviously it's disappointing what happened, but Carlos has won the race, the team has won the race. You can't go running around pointing the finger at certain people. We have to do this together. This isn't just about you. And whilst I agree with that and acknowledge that, based on what Ferrari or Mattia Binotto said on their own assessment of this strategy call, or this mistake, if you like, they didn't exactly own up to the mistakes. They obviously still stick to their guns and say this was the best strategy call. And he also invited other people to sort of recommend. I think he had a bit of a go with the media, invited them to recommend something better. And I think if he had a burner account on social media or anything like that, I'm pretty sure there would have been a lot of people that would have weighed in, myself included, on this one as well. So I feel like it kind of goes both ways. I think Ferrari need to acknowledge, like Mercedes had done in the past. I mean, Austria a few years ago, wasn't it? Lewis's race got messed up, and I think James Vowles on the radio or to vouch for one of the two, and they owned up for the error. But that's a team that's gone on to win so many championships, something that Ferrari haven't done for a while, and perhaps that is one key factor. They need to own up when they make mistakes, whether it be public or internally, and then try and come up with a solution together to get the best result possible next time round.
Yeah, that Mattia kind of it was interesting. Yeah, you're totally right in terms of like I think he did the right thing first of all by telling Charles. You could see actually as he walked by Carlos, just the body language, he was angry. He was definitely angry. I think it was the right thing for Mattia to just go, don't throw your team under the bus. Just say the PR spiel. Just say we'll do better next time. Blah blah blah. Let's keep this for the debrief. But then, yeah, kind of being a little bit confrontational afterwards with the media in terms of, what would you do in my situation or something like that. There was a really good Karun Chanok interview where Karun was like, I think you did have the gap to box. I just looked on the SkyPad, and Mattia was just like, what? Or something like that. He was just like, double stack, yeah. Surely not. No, we didn't have the gap or something like that. So that was a bit of a weird look. Mattia is being tested as well. I mean, this is also his first World Championship fight as well. I mean, this is not, Toto Wolff's or Christian Horner's first rodeo, no doubt about it. And he's kind of also learning on his feet and also learning what the pressure of a title fight, the scrutiny of a title fight is like. And he's also got to perform, and he hasn't so far. So there's a lot of things going on with Ferrari. Is it just they're kind of getting back used to, being under this pressure, and they're going to kind of sort it out by the end of the season? But is it going to be too late by then? So, yeah, I'm looking forward to Austria. I'm looking forward to seeing how the team actually rebound, because Austria is going to be a big, big race for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm certainly looking forward to it as well. And being a sprint weekend, there's obviously more opportunities to get some more points. So it could be a big weekend for Ferrari. Let's move on now to Mercedes. Now, obviously, we can talk about Red Bull in a bit, but I'm quite intrigued by Mercedes this season. Obviously, it's not gone to plan by their lofty standards historically over the last decade or so of their success. But what we saw last weekend at Silverstone was, in my opinion, one of the real first indications that, given the right set of circumstances and the right track conditions, this W13, in the right hands, of course, Sir Lewis Hamilton doing an incredible job. I'm sure George would have been in the fight as well to some degree. This car still has enough of what it takes, in my mind, to at least be in the fight, albeit with a few more upgrades to come, I'm sure. Where is your mind at with Mercedes? Because for me, it felt like they were more disappointed about the fact that perhaps they made the wrong strategy call themselves towards the end, before the safety car, if you like, and thinking that this was a race that we could have won. Do you share those thoughts, or do you feel that perhaps it was just one of those where perhaps they were close, but not quite close enough still?
I think they were close, but not quite close enough. I don't think they could have won it in the end. If Leclerc did pit, if Ferrari did go for that double stop, no doubt Lewis would have stayed out, because he actually put on his tyres, quite fairly soon before then. So it was a weird one. But once Leclerc stayed out, Lewis wasn't going to get past him. The car just wasn't quite there, even though the Ferrari had a bit of damage. This was definitely a race where the Mercedes just came into its own. It needs the car is good in some, in certain conditions, and everything kind of came together. It needs kind of more, fast corners, definitely a smooth track as well, so that it kind of stops the bouncing. They have sorted, I think, the porpoising issue, but they still have bouncing, which are two different things. So I'll see. I'll be interested to see how Austria goes for them. I think tracks like Hungary are going to be a bit more tricky because that's a much more bumpier track, much more slow corners, kind of more direction change. So yeah, Austria is going to be an interesting one. But yeah, certainly for Silverstone, I mean, Lewis Hamilton was amazing. The pace was right there. He was the reason why Ferrari didn't have a comfortable pit stop. So, and that tells you everything. He was pushing the Ferraris all the way. They were looking at Lewis. A few races ago, when the car just wasn't quite there, it wasn't in the right conditions, they wouldn't have even been looking at Mercedes. So it should have been an easy Ferrari 1-2, but Sir Lewis Hamilton definitely made Ferrari work for it. And in the end, they kind of cracked a little bit. So I still think a P3 for him is a fantastic result, especially in front of his crowd. But yeah, that car is still very inconsistent. I think that Mercedes, they know they're obviously not in the title fight this season, but they're still in that learning phase for next year. What can we learn with this package? It's not just about let's go to a previous spec or, do we get this right or wrong? Why is the car not working compared to Red Bull and Ferrari? I think that's still where they're at. And they're still trying to find what tracks there will be opportunities. So I think France could be a very good track for them. That's a much more smoother track. So yeah, we're gonna wait and see. But don't expect this to be the norm, in my opinion, in terms of Lewis and George chasing the Ferraris or Red Bulls for the podium in every single race now.
Yeah, it was encouraging, but I'm kind of with you on this one. I feel like they have gotten a little bit closer, and of course, Silverstone is one of those circuits, as we kind of expected. Mercedes himself kind of pinpointed this one as being the one where they perhaps might have fancied getting a win or some big points, and in Sir Lewis's hands, he was doing an incredible job. I also agree, I don't think that the way the race was playing out, that they could have won that race unless something happened to the Ferraris ahead of them. Either way you look at it, I think it would have got to a point where one of the Ferraris on soft tyres, whether there was a safety car or not a safety car, they would have been able to get ahead of him at some point, or they would have finished ahead of him. It was just one of those races where I felt like something else had to happen. And as you pointed out, if it wasn't for what happened to Max Verstappen, he'd have probably run away with the race anyway. So I think you have to judge it on its merits for what actually happened. And I think if someone had offered P3 for Hamilton and Mercedes, only one of the Ferraris finished ahead of him, I think he'd probably would have taken that anyway. So it was really encouraging to see. I'm with you on this one. I think Austria this weekend, maybe, I don't want to say back to normal service for Mercedes this season, but I do feel the characteristics of the circuit are going to lend themselves to Mercedes not enjoying the strengths of their car in the same way that they would have done at Silverstone.
Yeah, I don't think, and also, we kind of let's not forget that Red Bull were kind of out of the picture in Silverstone as well. And I definitely think that Max Verstappen around the Red Bull ring, where he has kind of dominated in recent years, he is definitely going to be firmly in the picture. But yeah, you never know. Anything can happen. And Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes and even George Russell, they still have the pace to be kind of able to pick up the pieces. So yeah, anything can happen, and nothing is over. I still kind of want to see him, just from kind of a bit of a biased point of view, I want to see him win at least one race, just kind of continue the streak of winning at least one race in every single season that he's competed. So yeah, that'd be quite cool as well.
Yeah, that's something that was on my mind over the course of the weekend. I was sort of watching the race thinking, is this going to be the day where he keeps that record going? I mean, it may still happen. Could happen at Paul Ricard, there could be a few other circuits. I mean, Mercedes themselves have admittedly saying that this could be the month where Mercedes may get some big results and ultimately may decide on what they do with their current car. Do they sort of, I imagine they'll continue to improve on the concept they have. I don't think they're going to rip it up and start again, but this could be the month where they decide what to do with the 2022 car. Do they continue working on it, or do they just focus on next season? So it will be interesting to see what they can do into Lewis's hands, especially this weekend. With George Russell, first time this season he failed to finish in the top 5. The consistency, the streak had to run it. It feels crazy to think that there was a time where George Russell went a long, long time before scoring points in Formula One, and now it just seemed like he can't stop. Looking back on what happened at Silverstone to him, obviously it was incredibly unlucky. The most interesting part of it was obviously from the moral perspective, or did he do the right thing in terms of leaving his car to check on his compatriots, if you like, checking on Albon and checking on Zhou, whilst by his own admission he felt he could have got that car back to the pits, which ultimately was the reason why his race ended. Where was your thoughts on this? Because I was kind of the opinion that whilst morally George did the right thing, and you'd probably say there were a handful of other drivers that would have probably done the same thing in that situation, by the letter of the law in terms of the race, it probably wasn't the smartest thing to do to get out of your car on a live circuit, even in a red flag situation.
To be honest, just on the car thing, I don't think that he would have been able to kind of get it started anyway, because I think there was underlying issues that meant that he wouldn't be able to kind of like do the race. So I think the car was kind of like gone after the crash anyway. But yeah, I mean, I think it was Callum Ilott that actually came out and said that, you know, this is not the first time that George has done that, in terms of like there was a kart race that both of them did when they were kids, and it was the first time Callum Ilott actually flipped a kart, and George Russell stopped on track and made sure that he was okay, and kind of took the car off him. So George is just that kind of guy. I think he saw that the car was broken, and he kind of also saw the massive crash that just happened in front of him. I mean, look, quite literally in front of him. He was right there. So he definitely wanted to make sure that Joe was okay. I think the intentions were good. And again, if there was anything that he could have done, you know, even be there kind of 20 or 30 seconds earlier than some of the marshals on the scene to check that he was all right, I think he kind of did the right thing. I think it's a weird one because, again, I think that the car was kind of gone anyway. So I don't really mind what he did. Again, it was a red flag situation. And at that point, the drivers have to be very, very aware that there might be marshals on the track or something. So I don't mind too much what he did. And I feel like it was almost a little bit overplayed from George in terms of I still could have got back into the race. I would have loved for him to see him back in the race. I definitely prefer Mr. Consistency over Mr. Saturday, but I think the car was kind of gone by then. I don't mind him checking on another driver in that kind of situation.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, because I think what was going through my head at the time, whilst obviously you had the caveat, as you mentioned already, that it didn't look like there was any way that Mercedes could get back to the pits anyway. I mean, it was on free wheels, and I know people say, oh, well, Lewis won a race on a Mercedes on free wheels or brought it over the line. Different situation. I mean, there was no rear left tyre on that car, so it literally was going to be driving at an angle. I think there was
some gearbox. Yeah, I think there was some gearbox issues as well, and he couldn't get it started anyway. So
no, true.
Yeah, it was a weird one.
Yeah, I mean, it needed assistance from the marshals anyway, so there was no way he was going to be able to take that back. But you know, all that said, I kind of came at this with the opinion that whilst I commend what George did, and I think it was an incredible gesture what he did, you know, something that, as I said already, not many F1 drivers today or in any era probably would have done the same thing under the circumstances. But if they'd have allowed him back in the race, I'd have been a bit worried that it could potentially set a precedence that for some drivers it's okay to get out of a car when someone else has had a crash just to check on their well-being on a live track. And of course, we had incidents with the protesters that were doing the rounds on social media that we didn't even see much of on the coverage, because their protest was kind of hindered by the fact that the race had already been red flagged before they even got there. So yeah, for me, from a safety perspective, I don't think you can allow any sort of wiggle room about any drivers or anyone just running onto a live circuit during the race. So yeah, as I said, kudos to George Russell, but obviously I think the FIA were probably right and F1 were right to take the stance that they did on that one. Obviously, the race this weekend for George is going to be a circuit where he very nearly scored points when he had a long battle with Fernando Alonso, just missing out in the Williams. Obviously, he's going to be a much more competitive machinery this weekend. So how do you think he's going to get on this weekend?
I think he's going to get on really well. I mean, he did a good job in the Williams last year. Obviously, had a hydraulic issue, I remember. And then he did have a good battle with Fernando Alonso as well. I mean, that was some proper racing right there with a lot of respect. I think he's going to have a good race. I think both him and Lewis are kind of like, I actually think that the two teams ahead of them, both Ferrari and Red Bull, I think they're going to be quite comfortable, maybe a little bit more than in Silverstone. So it's going to be one of those, you know, 5th and 6th. If they can get any more than that, that's brilliant for them. So I'm not expecting too much, I'm afraid, from Mercedes. But again, you never know in Formula One. Anything could happen.
Well, that's it. And of course, with the sprint race as well, you never know. And reliability could be a huge factor. We've seen it in the past. Mercedes will know very well how reliability can be a problem. A few years ago when they lost both cars in that race, which was seemingly theirs to lose. So it's certainly up for grabs, especially with the reliability issues that Ferrari have had. And Red Bull, you never know. The bad luck may continue for them. But on the subject of Red Bull, obviously there's not too much to say on them, really, because I think the big takeaway from Silverstone for them is obviously, first of all, Ferrari and Leclerc didn't really gain too much on Max and Red Bull. You know, Perez did a great job to recover. It took advantage of the safety car. And there wasn't reliability concerns, really. Max's problem was driving over a piece of AlphaTauri debris there. And of course, Max was posing with the piece that was lodged in the floor of his car. So found himself in a very similar position to where he was in Hungary last year, having to drive practically a very damaged car and still get some points. So first of all, how impressed were you by Max to keep that going? Because it did feel for a while that Red Bull was trying to coax Max into just carrying on. It felt like Max just wanted to park it and give up, but he still carried on and managed to score some big championship points, which ultimately could be pivotal in this championship.
I think it's just kind of the emotional ups and downs of drivers. We hear it all the time on team radio, and kind of, again, when you're in, the car or a car, when you're in that helmet, it is just you, and you always feel like everything is going wrong, but it's never really as bad as, you think it is. All you need is someone like, your engineer to kind of just calm you down, reassure you, and everything was all right for Max. The car was damaged, whatever. He couldn't have obviously won the race, but it was damage limitations. He finished in 7th. His title rival, even though, Charles Leclerc is not in 2nd, Charles Leclerc only finished in 4th, which actually, that's a 6-point difference. That's only a 6-point gain that Charles Leclerc made on Max, which, when you think about it, for a recovery drive, I think Max is absolutely going to take that. So, yeah, it wasn't actually that bad of a race for Max in the end, considering the circumstances. Whilst when you look at the recovery drives that Charles has had to do, both in Imola, where he spun, and also in Canada, Max has won both of those races and gained a lot more points than 6 in each of them. So, yeah, weird one. It was a good race by Checo as well to kind of make it back. Obviously, he had the pace to kind of get back to 4th, and then the safety car really helped him out. But he also did the job to get back to 2nd. Is a really impressive result. So everything is just going Red Bull's way, and I feel like we're just witnessing Max Verstappen, the relentless consistency of Max Verstappen, regardless if he's fighting for a win or if he's kind of, holding on to a 7th because his car is damaged. We're just looking at a driver driving at the absolute peak of his abilities, and he's doing an amazing job. It is really just amazing to see. So, yeah, I have those kind of expectations of Max to just dominate because we're seeing greatness in front of our eyes, and it's just kind of like, I don't want to take it for granted, but that's just what Max does, really. So, yeah, even on a weekend where perhaps it didn't quite go his way, it could have gone a lot worse, to be fair. So, yeah.
Yeah, one of the factors of last weekend, obviously one of the things that people talked about on social media was the how aggressive, to some degree, both the Red Bull drivers were in separate incidents. And of course, neither of them were penalised for the incidents they were involved in. Of course, Max in particular was involved in an incident at the start of the race. People were looking at the when he forced Charles Leclerc a little bit wide at the beginning of the race. But of course, in that incident, I thought that was absolutely fine. But in the same corner, he was obviously battling Mick Schumacher and was very aggressive there. And one I thought that was a little bit more over the line, in that he should have given Mick a little bit more room. And obviously Checo, with his first lap incident with Charles, obviously a bit 50-50 there. And of course, at Club and Vale, when he cut the corner and forced Leclerc wide, which allowed Hamilton to sort of undercut the pair of them, that incident. All of those incidents, the stewards deemed that they were absolutely fine and no reason to sort of penalise them. Where was your head at with those? And in addition to that, do you feel like this was one of those that perhaps Red Bull need to be concerned about, that their drivers don't get caught up in silly incidents like that? Because otherwise they've been driving superlatively well.
I don't think it's too big of a worry for Red Bull because their drivers are doing a good job on the track. You want to kind of manage the expectations of drivers and also manage their emotions, but you don't want to kind of pull them back too much. I mean, this is Max and Checo performing, and Checo as well, actually, both of them performing at their absolute best. So you don't want them to stop attacking. But yeah, to me, the Max and Schumacher one, it was super close. Obviously, Max kind of ran Schumacher off the road, but that's just what Max does. And to be honest, he's driving to the rules that the stewards are giving him. So even though I think that he was maybe over aggressive, Max is doing exactly what's allowed in Formula One. So fair play to him. And that's why he is such a ferocious world champion. That's why he's such a ferocious racer, because he doesn't take any prisoners. And when you look at Checo, that one maybe, in my opinion, was a little bit over the line. I do feel like that should have been a 5-second penalty, because he wasn't even alongside Leclerc. He literally just skipped over Club, coming back onto the track, and Leclerc actually had to take avoidant action and lost a position because of it. So yeah, that one to me was a little bit more on the edge. I think some people are saying that in the corner before Charles Leclerc went off the track, but that was a lot closer, So yeah, the Checo one is the only one where I look at it and think, that's a tight one. That's a very tight one. I'm not really, if I was Charles Leclerc, I wouldn't be happy seeing that back, in terms of he came off the track and he wasn't even side by side when he left the track. So yeah, that's the only one that I kind of don't really like. But other than that, it's just Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez racing. And we know they're both very hard racers. We know that, no doubt about it. They're just racing at that kind of really high level. They're racing to their maximum potential. And sometimes that means that they're very aggressive, but that's just what's kind of doing the job at the moment. So I don't think Red Bull kind of should be too, I don't think they should be kind of drawing them back too much.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head there when you were saying about it's up to the stewards to sort of think if that's over the line, they should be penalised. And I think that's something that for as long as this driving standards debate will go on. I mean, it was something I thought we'd put at the back of our minds a few weeks ago after people were saying, oh, Max is driving a lot more methodically now. He seems to be a bit more calmer. And not to single out Max, but this is the guy that's obviously being, every time driving standards seem to be questioned, this is the guy that people seem to use as the reference point for what is acceptable and what isn't. Obviously, pinpointing what happened in Brazil last year with Sir Lewis Hamilton, obviously a few incidents in that year. And obviously this season, this was the first time I thought where he really started to get his elbows out in a position where frustrations were high. And Perez as well to agree. And of course, other drivers have done the same thing. But in your mind, should we be more focused on making sure the stewards are consistent with what they decide to do in terms of what they deem as the right way to drive? Or should we be, because right now I feel like Max is doing what he's doing and other drivers are doing what they're doing. And whilst people will draw contrast between the two in certain isolated examples, I see a lot of people on social media criticising one person here or one person there, or Max last weekend or someone else another weekend. And it feels like people just need to accept what the stewards are saying as what they deem as acceptable driving standards. Because as you pointed out, Max drives to the absolute limit. And people might say beyond that, but if he's not being penalised for it, then it's either a case of the rules aren't strict enough or Max is doing what he should be.
Yeah, and that's kind of the point that I've been making in terms of I'm not a big fan of some of the things that Max does, but I also think he pushes the rules so much that it's kind of exciting. That's where the boundaries of racing are. If Max Verstappen is allowed to do that, it's not his fault. None of this is really kind of Max's fault, especially if he's not getting penalties for it. So fair play on him. And to me, I do think it's the stewards that kind of I think we need to kind of be reminded what's allowed in wheel-to-wheel combat and what's not. And at the moment, I think it's being pushed just a little bit too much over the limit. But again, it's the steward's job of kind of telling the fans and the drivers what's allowed and what's not allowed.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. I mean, the guy never really, in my opinion, and people might come at me in the comments for saying this, but Max is not the sort of driver that when something like this comes up, he gets penalised for it a week later, or he does it again and then gets penalised. Once the line has been drawn, he knows where it is, and it will literally push his car as far to the line as he possibly can, or that he can get away with. I mean, the Verstappen rule, moving under braking, so famously named after him after an incident with Raikkonen in Spa many years ago. The first driver to get penalised for it, Sebastian Vettel. Max wasn't penalised for doing that afterwards. Weaving on the straights, we saw that in Brazil last season, doing that. Obviously, they brought that into effect. The first driver to get punished, I think a couple of weeks ago, was Fernando Alonso in Canada for doing something like that. And probably someone else did it before that, but it wasn't Max. So that I think you have to kind of draw the line there.
In Australia,
yes, Stroll, yes.
That as well.
Yes. Absolutely right. I knew there was another one. I couldn't think of who it was, but absolutely. But it wasn't Max. That's kind of the point I'm making here. He's pushing it, but obviously when the line is drawn, you don't see him going over that line afterwards. So I think you kind of have to give credit where credit's due in that regard. Let's move on to the midfield now. And obviously, what we tend to do on this show now, Aldas, since you last come on, is owing to time, we just kind of summarise the big stories in the midfield. And obviously, I'll ask you to pick out a few people you're expecting a weekend, whether it's good or bad, people to look out for. So we've got obviously the two McLarens, contrasting weekends for them last weekend. Norris had a good weekend, thought he could have got P5, but a bit of a pit stop issue prevented that, but still a solid P6 in his home race. That would have been great for him. Ricciardo obviously having a bad weekend despite his upsurge in form. He seemed to fall back into the old Ricciardo that we've seen in the last year or so. Alonso, great P5 for him in Alpine, was right up in the fight with Hamilton, Perez and Leclerc and Norris, of course, towards the end. A bit of a surprise to everyone because people had forgotten him, and there he was all of a sudden getting involved. So good for him. Ocon, unlucky with reliability, but was running well before that. And then, of course, you got the Aston Martins. Vettel finished in the points last week on his birthday, of course, and Lance Stroll was nearly there. But Aston Martin, they seem to be good one weekend, not great at the other. But the race car seems to be better than the qualifying one, so that's good news for them. Of course, AlphaTauri could have been more for them, but that incident with both their drivers where Tsunoda went into Gasly kind of ruined things. So I'm not sure if them two are going to be as chummy as they have been in recent weeks, but I'm sure they'll move on from that. And then, of course, we've got Williams. We don't know where Williams would have been last weekend because Albon had an upgraded car, but unfortunately ended up into the wall before turn one. So we don't really know how well he would have done in the race. Latifi, despite having a personal best finish for the season, getting him up into 20th now in this championship, obviously only P12 for him. And then, of course, we've got the two Haases who got in the big points this weekend. Double points finish for them. Mick Schumacher getting his first points. Incredible battle with Max Verstappen. I think making the smart choice to sort of back out in the end, although I must admit I kind of enjoyed the idea of thinking he might get Max before the line. I think a lot of people did, and obviously K-Mag getting points too. So that all summarised in a huge cluster. And let's not forget the Alfa Romeos, of course. They had a double retirement too.
Yeah.
Yep, but unlucky for them. But they've been going rather well in most weeks. This is Silverstone was very bad luck, but obviously both of them were okay, so that's the important thing. Who are you expecting, with all of that summarised, to have a good weekend? Which 2 or 3 drivers are you looking out for this weekend in that midfield?
I think definitely Lando Norris. I feel like he's gone quite well around Austria before. I feel like he'll be a little bit frustrated actually because he did get done over a little bit by the pit stop. Still not quite sure why McLaren pitted him a lap later and allowed Alonso on the fresh tyres to kind of undercut him under the safety car as well, which is a bit strange. So yeah, I feel like Lando Norris, he's going to be out for a little bit of revenge. And also in terms of like some of the other guys, I think also the 2 Alfa Romeos, I think, Zhou, the annoying thing about that crash as well is he was on a roll. Like Canada was the first race where he really outqualified Valtteri Bottas. Then he outqualified him again at Silverstone, again in mixed weather conditions, scored points in Canada, wasn't allowed to kind of race for the points because of the crash. I feel like he's going to be, really up for it in terms of like putting the crash behind him and kind of scoring, getting back on that good roll that he kind of started in Canada and almost continued into Silverstone. So certainly a Zhou as well. And definitely one of the AlphaTauri guys, they need to sort it out. I feel like it will be a big one for Yuki Tsunoda because back-to-back races where he made mistakes, crashing out of the pits in Canada, crashing into his teammate, and also taking the win away from Red Bull as well. So, yeah, I'm not sure how that debrief went down with Helmut Marko as well. So I think those 3 guys, for different reasons, I want to see them, and I think they have maybe a bit of a bounce-back weekend in Austria.
Yeah, I think so too. And on the subject of Yuki Tsunoda, are you concerned that whilst, as far as I understand, it's not fully formally confirmed that Yuki Tsunoda will be there next year, although we all expect for him to be there, and of course some other outside news related to the Red Bull program and a few drivers that were once a part of it obviously might have made that decision a little bit easier. Do you feel that Yuki Tsunoda might be a little bit distracted by all of that in terms that his focus was more set in races before all of that, and now things seem to have calmed down? He was driving rather well. Perhaps his focus has gone a little bit, because I don't want to be too harsh on the guy because I'm a big fan of his, but they were quite rookie errors by his standards this season.
They were, but it was just classic Yuki. He's one of the, I'm a big fan of Yuki, but when you support Yuki Tsunoda, it's like one race he's amazing, he's beating Gasly, it looks like he's making progress, and the next race he's binning it out of the pits or crashing into his teammate or sending it down too late. So it's the ups and downs and the roller coaster of Yuki Tsunoda, or being a fan of Yuki Tsunoda. I definitely think there might be something to that. Perhaps now he's a little bit more comfortable. He thinks, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to get the contract, and maybe he's just taking something away a little bit. He just needs to sit down. I think Francis Tost needs to have a little word with him in terms of like, okay, let's just chill out a little bit. You were having a really good season, actually. You were doing a really good job. So let's just have a quiet weekend. Maybe even if you don't score points, let's just have a clean weekend where we just avoid accidents and avoid controversy, and then we can make progress from there. So yeah, I definitely think he's still going to be there next year, but he needs to buckle down. He was having a good start to the season. He's kind of been letting himself down. This is the Yuki Tsunoda of 2021 that we've seen in the past couple of races. So yeah, and he's still a young guy. He's going to be one of those drivers where I think if he does stay in Formula One for a few years, because he does have the pace, he's actually quite a quick driver, but there's still a maturing process. There's still a consistency that we haven't yet seen from him. He's not someone like a Lando Norris who every single week is just, there on the money in the midfield. He's someone who's going to need a bit more nurturing. And even though he's not a rookie anymore, it's just that maturity, he still doesn't quite have it. So I think, but he's at the right team. There's enough pressure, but also enough support with the AlphaTauri team, the likes of Franz Tost. There's a lot of experienced people over there that have a lot of experienced young drivers. So yeah, I wouldn't be too worried about him, but at the same time, I think he's going to need to stop this kind of really bad run of form, get back into scoring points.
Yeah, I think so too. And as I said, we're both fans of Yuki Tsunoda. We know what he can do, obviously following his junior career as well. He was, a few more races, he may have won that F2 championship when the people talking about Schumacher and Ilott back then, he was that good. And, I've always felt with Tsunoda this season that whilst he's improved so much and he's really impressed me, there's always been those issues last season where there are a few people in F1. I think David Coulthard was one person that was very annoyed at Yuki over the fact that he felt he wasn't taking this seriously enough. And perhaps that now he's a little bit more relaxed, the focus might have wavered a little bit, whereas someone like Lando Norris, as you say, will come across as a guy that will have fun, have a joke around and do everything he wants to have a good time. But the moment the visor goes down, it's business. and he delivers. Is that something you feel that Yuki needs to develop as he matures a bit more, to that you can have your fun, you can play around, you can be relaxed and be the nice guy that everyone loves and everyone loves to talk to, but as soon as that helmet goes down, your focus has to be 100% on the job, so that you can eradicate those sort of errors that he probably will want to take out of his armory, similar to what he did in 2021?
Yeah, definitely. He's just, it's, different people mature at different points. And I feel like, yeah, we're just seeing it now with Yuki. Obviously, he's, again, I think it's just one of those arm around the shoulder kind of things now, in terms of like making sure that he doesn't make too many mistakes, kind of, holding him back a little bit. When you were attacking Pierre Gasly, that's your teammate. And also into that corner as well, just before the loop, that's a tricky corner. That's not where you want to be attacking your teammate. A DRS pass on the straight, that's one thing. Going into turn 2, I think, or turn 3, that's a lot more tight. You've got to be sure of the move if you're going to do it on your teammate. And I think it was just a lack of judgment. So yeah, maybe the focus isn't quite there. Maybe again, it's wavering, but again, that's the job of the team to kind of make sure that he's not regressing to where he was last year.
Yeah, absolutely right. Before we get into the predictions at the end of the episode, Aldas, I just want to talk a little bit about Haas, because I feel like this is a story that has had its ups and downs, and I'm really happy to talk this week about a team that obviously the enthusiasm is going to be so high. Everyone's going to be really happy right now. This was a team that I felt probably had the best weekend of anybody, including Ferrari, despite the fact that Ferrari won that race. And obviously, in tandem with that, you've got Mick Schumacher, who scored his first points after so long. Ironically, the 1 week where I don't predict Mick Schumacher to get points, he actually does it. So maybe there's a trend there that I need to follow to help Mick out. But obviously now that he's got that done, Haas are obviously buoyant. They're obviously going to be delighted about what happened in Silverstone. Can we expect more from this from Haas? Because I'm still a little bit concerned that their peak in terms of their relative performance to their rivals in this development era and the lack of budget they have compared to their rivals, that there is a fear that they may have less pace compared to the rivals from each week when more upgrades go on their respective cars compared to them. Can we put that aside and hope that they might do more of what they did at Silverstone? Or do you feel that it's going to be more weekends where they just have to maximize what they have and just hope that things fall into place for them?
Yeah, I think that, because that car is very inconsistent. Like when it's on it, it's absolutely on it. It's one of the best, in that midfield. It seems like they can fight with them, like some McLaren and Alpine. But when it's not, like in Canada, they had a disaster race, and it's kind of like, they qualified so well in Canada, but the race just fell apart. So it's weird. I don't think that team, the predictions I make is that I don't think it would be a very consistent team. I do think it's going to be up and down. Maybe the next race for Mick is not going to do well, not going to be good. Also for K-Mag as well. But when they do have a good race, when they can see that, we have got pace and this car has pace in the race, they need to capitalize it. So they need to capitalize on it. So that's going to be the really big kind of important thing. I understand that the consistency might not be there because the consistency of the car might not be there. But yeah, now he's got that monkey off his back of he has got points. So, we can kind of stop talking about that. But he is still by no means under no pressure. He's only scored points once, and this needs to be the beginning. And now he needs to start, being still not crashing, by the way. So that's really important in terms of like, there was a lot of crashes early on in the season. He needs to carry that on in terms of like, keeping it clean. So just maximize the points when the opportunity is there. I know that there's not going to be consistency, but there is still a long way to go for Mick to be fully secure of that team.
Yeah, I think so too. And obviously he's been in that position a few times this year. This was by no means a one-off where he was brilliant. He's been in that position a lot, but he's not been able to see it through for one reason or another. So it's nice to see him do that. But now the focus has to be on doing that again and doing that more regularly in the same way that K-Mag's expected to, because that's the guy that he needs to be competing with. And until recently, he's been well below par in that regard. So hopefully for his sake, that will continue. And this is a guy that obviously we followed for a little while. His biggest trait is the fact that he learns. And when he does start learning and he's adapted himself, he's up there with anybody almost. And that's something in F1 that you don't really have the time to develop and work on. You have to be on it. So now that he's got that chance, and with a name like Schumacher, obviously is going to open doors for you, and obviously the help Ferrari will have given him, he now has to start delivering on that. So hopefully for his sake, that will continue. And yeah, who knows? We might see a bit more of that for Mick Schumacher. It certainly was encouraging to see. Now, final part of the episode, Aldas. We, as you would have remembered before, we do our predictions for the race weekend. Now, being it's a sprint race weekend, I'm not going to ask you so much about qualifying, because I think there are certain nuances with sprint racing that obviously we're aware of by now. I'm sure F1 fans by now would know, which makes it a little bit more tricky. But before we get into the top three, for the sprint race, how have you been judging sprint races based on what we saw in Imola? Because we've only had one, and obviously we've got a few this year as well, and we're expected to have more in the following years. compared to what we had last year, would you consider Imola to be a relative success for sprint races? And what would you consider a success in Austria? Something similar to that, or perhaps we need a bit more excitement and action?
I mean, to be brutally honest, I'm so indifferent about sprint races. Like even in Imola, like I liked it. I mean, I think I liked it, but it just kind of. I mean, I barely even remember it that much. Like there were a few overtakes. I remember, I think Sergio Perez or Carlos Sainz might have made it back to the front. I think it was Sergio Perez after a poor qualifying, and I feel like it almost gives the top teams more of a chance to get back if they made a mistake in quali. So I still don't know how I feel. My answer, how I feel about them, is I still don't know because I'm so indifferent. Like I think I quite like them. You know, it's quite cool to see some more racing. It's quite nice to see qualifying on the Friday. That's quite cool, but. Yeah, I'm still very indecisive about them. I don't know if it does make the racing better. It did, to be fair. You know, the races last year where sprint races were part of the calendar, they were better races. Like those were exciting races in Brazil and also Monza and Silverstone. So maybe there is something to it. But in terms of Imola, purely looking at the 2022 side, I don't feel like it did kind of do. I don't think like it did really add massively to that specific race, but at the same time, I'm not one of those people that just massively hates them as well. I just feel like they're there. I don't know how I feel about them, but I'm just kind of like, yeah, okay, it's quite cool to mix it up, but at the same time, I don't think it really adds anything. Although I'm looking forward to giving them, another chance and seeing what they serve up. So yes, my direct answer is very indirect, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I feel like I'm warming to it a little bit, but I feel like that's more triggered by the fact that I'd rather watch a sprint race than watch another Friday practice session or something or a Saturday practice session, for example. I'm still one of those that wants to hold on to a Saturday qualifying. If there was a way where you could get a sprint race and a Saturday qualifying session in, or something where Saturday qualifying just applies to the main race and you can fill in the same way that it does with F2 and F3, but obviously I'm not the person to make that decision. It's obviously a lot more complicated than that, but I agree. I think you need to give it a bit of a chance, see how it goes. And as I said, Imola wasn't massively memorable. I agree. I think the most memorable part of that was Max Verstappen recovering from a poor start and obviously taking the lead off Leclerc towards the end. That long hunt between the two, that was good. We hadn't seen that in sprint races before. It's usually someone gets away and then it's a bit of a procession after that for 20 laps and then they start on pole. But that's just how it's been. So we'll have to wait and see. Obviously, people do get in the comments and let us know your thoughts about sprint races and if you're looking forward to this one, what you're expecting. But now, the final part, predictions. Aldas, I'm going to ask you for your top 3 for Sunday's race and also a bold prediction as well. Anything that you like that you think might be considered a bit bold for the weekend.
I am going to go, in terms of my top 3 in the race, I am going to go with Max Verstappen to win, which I know is not very bold, but it is the Max Verstappen ring. Looking at the last few years, I'm going to go with Charles Leclerc in second, and also I'm going to go with Sergio Perez in third. So maybe not the most exciting of podiums. In terms of my one bold prediction, who do I think is going to do really well? I'm going to go, do you know what? I'm going to go Lando Norris in the top 5. I think he's going to be right up there in terms of pace. I feel like he's going to be quick around that track. And I think he's going to give Lewis Hamilton and George Russell something to think about. So I'm going to go with Lando in the top 5.
Yeah, I think that's a good shout, actually. I mean, Lando's gone very well there in recent years. Last year, obviously, Lewis had a nice long battle with him and called him a very good driver or a great driver, actually. So, great compliment there. So Lando definitely, hopefully, goes well this weekend. But no, that's a really good set of predictions, actually. I think I'm going to go... I'm going to hate myself for this because I hate the way that I predict this because I feel like it goes against me, but I'm going to stick to my guns. I am going to be a bit different. I'm going to go for Leclerc to recover this and win. I just feel like the way he's driving at the moment, surely it's got to fall for him at some point. The guy's had so much misfortune, whether through reliability or strategy issues or just bad luck in general. So hopefully he can get the job done just to reignite this championship. I feel like right now he's the only guy with the car, the ability and the freedom as well to go after Max Verstappen in this championship to make something of it. I think the only guy that can do it, obviously there's some great drivers there, but they just don't have the machinery or the freedom to go after Max. So hopefully Leclerc can get the job done. I'm going to go for Max Verstappen P2. I don't think it's going to be a big gain, but I think it's just going to be enough. And third place, I'm going to go with Sergio Perez. I think Perez is going to have a strong weekend, and I think he's going to finish in P3 for Red Bull. My bold prediction this weekend, I'm very intrigued to see how good this Williams is in race pace, because Alex Albon's quali pace, albeit in strange qualifying conditions, was a lot better than what we saw. It wasn't quite Go-Tifi levels in qualifying, as a credible story as that was, and it almost went a whole episode without talking about that, but incredible stuff from Latifi on that regard. But it's always depends on the conditions. But no, I think Albon, I'm going to predict points for Albon this weekend. Nice. I think that Williams, from what we've seen, obviously, I don't know if it was a second lapping performance. It's hard to tell, going from having the slowest car on the grid to all of a sudden being competitive in the midfield to some degree. And Albon has obviously driven the blueprint performance, the 100% performance in that car. I don't want to say he's outdriven it, because I hate that term. It's something that just doesn't exist. You can't outdrive a car as good, no matter. But Albon is doing a fantastic job. So yeah, I think points for Albon in that one too. But guys, let us know your predictions for the Austrian Grand Prix. Of course, don't forget, it's a sprint race this weekend, the sprint weekend. So qualifying is going to be at Friday at 4 p.m. UK time. We're going to be having the DNF1 watch along for that with myself. We might have a guest. We'll have to wait and see, but it could just be me being a Friday. So join me for that one on the DNF1 YouTube channel as well. Of course, we do have this podcast on all major podcasting platforms. So if you listen to us on there, make sure to give us a 5-star review. And again, just a quick reminder, if you listen to us on anything other than Apple iTunes and you can't leave us a written review, send us a screenshot of you guys giving us a 5-star review. Send that to us on our Instagram or Twitter socials, and we will give you a shout out on the next episode as a nice thank you for that as well. Aldas, before we say goodbye for this episode, where can our followers that haven't heard of you, which is crazy, but there might be some out there that have not heard of you, where can they find you? And of course, tell us about all of the other great content that you do with Veloce as well that they might want to check out.
So you can find me at Aldas pretty much everywhere. YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok now as well. I've started
You're on
that,
TikTok
apparently
as well?
Yeah, just doing a few little bits on there. But yeah, in terms of the content I've got on my channel, I've got a big Ferrari piece coming out today as we record, so that's going to be interesting. And also, actually, I recently appeared on, I did some content with Veloce, obviously doing backseat driver, reacting to the British Grand Prix. It was actually a good race to watch, so I got lucky with that one. So yeah, definitely head to the Veloce channel and check that out. But yeah, I've got a big Ferrari piece coming on my channel today, so can't wait to get that out.
Yeah, sounds fantastic. Of course, I wouldn't recommend me for that content, mate, in terms of being on it, because if I was on Backstreet Driver, I'd just be moaning about Ferrari messing up in any way, although that might actually be entertaining for some people, but I'll leave that to Veloce to decide on that one, just wink, wink. But anyway, look, until next time, guys, thanks for tuning in. Stay safe as always, and until next time, we will see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. So until then, take care, guys.
Bye.